Thank you so much for coming. Welcome to the first Climate Action Workshop for Yarmouth's Climate Action Plan. My name is Medi Smith. I'm the brand new Sustainability Coordinator for Yarmouth. So thank you for taking some time out of a beautiful evening to be with us here tonight. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to just go briefly over some Climate Change 101 to make sure everyone is on the same page. We're going to discuss and look at some of the current impacts of climate change. We are going to think a little bit about how Yarmouth is taking action, and then we're going to dive into the climate action planning process that the town is undergoing with the Greater Portland Council of Governments, GPCOG. GPCOG is going to present some of the baseline data that they've been performing analysis to create. So how are we contributing to climate change and where are we vulnerable to its impacts? Then we have really the bulk of tonight just to break out into activities. There's different stations around the room and you can provide feedback, ask folks questions, and really dive into some of the data that we have to share with you. At the end of the breakout session, we'll come back, report back what we've heard at each station, and there'll be time for question and answers. So super basic, but just kind of wanted to make sure that this was up on the screen. But the greenhouse effect basically is what we're talking about here. So this is a phenomenon that makes Earth livable, but burning fossil fuels, which humans do all the time in all of our daily activities pretty much, adds heat-trapping gases that cover the Earth like a blanket, and they stay in our atmosphere, and they've actually changed our temperature and precipitation patterns over time. So the big takeaway is that the activities that we're doing, sometimes just in our daily lives, driving our gas cars, turning on the lights, things like that, that activity causes the climate to change. And the changing temperature and rainfall patterns have hazards that we can see that we're experiencing in Maine, in Yarmouth, and will continue to experience. So things like intense storms, flooding, drought, and heat waves really impact us in little ways and big ways over the long term and at acute moments of shock in our lives and throughout the year. So things like heavy rainfall events like we just had over the past month. Maybe we lost power or trees were down or properties were damaged, homes were flooded, but also kind of bigger things like heat-related illness is kind of more common with all the heat waves and increased temperatures, more Lyme disease and vector-borne diseases. We're seeing droughts and stress on wildlife. So all of these impacts are caused by the changing patterns from fossil fuels. So I am going to pass it over to Kelly from Greater Portland Council of Governments to talk a little bit more deeply about the trends that we're seeing in Maine.
Thanks, Medi, and welcome. Glad to see everyone out again. I'm Kelly Rayberg. I'm the Sustainability Program Manager with GPCOG and one of the many team members to help really shape and guide your climate action plan. And I'll stress that it is Yarmouth's climate action plan. It is not GPCOG's. It is your town plan. And so part of this process is collecting a lot of data. Unfortunately, we don't have always very specific town data, and so we have to rely on state, national information, especially when it comes to climate hazards. And so as Medi mentioned, we are experiencing a range of climate hazards. The effect that increasing greenhouse gas emissions have on our climate, one of which is warmer temperatures. So over about the past decade, we have seen that temperatures have risen over 3 degrees Fahrenheit, and that is most pronounced along the coast, so in places like Yarmouth. The graph on the screen kind of is showing the average high and low temperatures over kind of the course of since 1895, and we can see that average high temperatures in the summer are getting warmer, while we are not getting as cooler in the winter. And so this as Mehdi mentioned, has a range of impacts that we're really concerned about and that we want to dive into a little more and understand further what you're seeing within your town to try and get that more detailed perspective. We are seeing heat-related illnesses. We're seeing abundance of ticks. Every time I think I hear someone say, oh yeah, I had to pick 10 ticks off of me as soon as I just walked outside. That is related to warmer temperatures. And this also can impact the economy as we see agricultural shifts, as we see different industries change, especially when we have less snow, less winters, that impacts our winter tourist. There's the skating pond that I know, talking with staff, has been closed or was not open for much of the winter because we didn't get cold enough and we didn't freeze. One of the other things is we're seeing more rain, as I said, less snow. So overall, annual precipitation has increased, but we're seeing that fall more as rain and less as snow, partially due to the increasing temperatures. So you can see how everything kind of ties together. And for both of these, both rain and temperature, it's projected to continue to increase, especially as emissions continue. So we're going to see more rain, less snow, and higher temperatures. And so again, with this, one of the biggest things we see related to increased precipitation is flooding. And that can be both coastal flooding, but for Yarmouth, actually, it's going to be more inland flooding. You have a pretty rocky coast that can be pretty resilient to sea level rise, which I'll talk about in just a second. But as we start seeing more precipitation, you're going to have more inland flooding. With that, you might have more runoff from impervious surfaces, so roads, buildings, parking lots, and that can impact your water quality, which can then impact your human health. And again, the range of impacts varies greatly and kind of covers all areas of life, from your human health to agriculture and ecosystems to impacting properties, especially as we see the more rain, higher winds from intensive storms. You're going to potentially damage buildings, flood homes, and that can impact your property values as well. Sea level rise. That's one of the big things that we hear about in Maine, and it definitely is a problem. It is more of an issue in different areas, and I'm not saying that Yarmouth is immune to all sea level rise, because there are certain impact areas within your town that are more susceptible, but you do also have a more rocky coast. However, with that, we can also see more coastal erosion and other problems, so sea level rise will continue to be a problem. What we've seen is that sea levels around the Portland area have risen about 7.5 feet since 1912. And again, they're projected to increase. There's a range of projections, and so within your climate action plan, we'll look at and talk about some of that range that the national and international community are looking at for how much sea level rise might occur by 2050 and by 2100. And with this, we can see more what's sunny day or nuisance flooding. So a lot of times we associate flooding just with big storms when it comes in, but that's not always the case. Sometimes on a nice sunny blue day, we can experience flooding because of the sea level rise, because of high tides, and how that works. So we're going to continue to see those range of hazards and impacts. And then the last thing I'll talk about is changing ocean conditions. And this means both that the ocean is warming. Casco Bay or the Gulf of Maine is actually warming faster than 99% of the world's oceans. So it's something to consider. And also changing ocean means that the ocean is becoming more acidic. And this can really affect your marine economy and the marine ecology. So I know Yarmouth has a substantial aquaculture, fisheries, ecosystem, and we've seen there's a great article in the Portland Press Herald, I think last year, about the shifting lobster industry. That's one of the big Maine economy, drivers. And as the waters get warmer, lobster might start moving north, and that's going to impact our economy. And so we'll continue to see kind of this potential decline in those marine species' health, which can affect the water quality, affect people's livelihoods, and kind of affect your town. So that's kind of a brief high-level overview of some of the hazards. And I think, oh, wrong way. With that, I'm going to, turn it, and I'll finish with saying, overall, we are facing this climate crisis, and it does require long-term planning, and that's really why we're here, is to help set up for a climate action plan. But that's not to say that Yarmouth hasn't done anything already. In fact, you've actually done a lot of really, taken a lot of great steps. So I will turn it back to Mehdi, right, to talk about what has been done so far.
Thanks, Kelly. So I cannot take any of the credit for the amazing work that's been going on in Yarmouth because I'm brand new. So I just wanted to give a shout out to, some of the big accomplishments that the groups in Yarmouth have done over the past couple of years that really show the dedication of the town. So in 2018, the Committee for Energy Efficiency and Sustainability, or CEAS, was formed. So if you're on CEAS and you're here, you can raise your hand a little bit. Thank you guys for coming. And then in spring of 2022, the town declared a climate emergency, which is a really amazing dedication to recognizing the hazards and the impacts of climate change that Kelly just mentioned. And that movement was supported by the Yarmouth High School Environmental Action Club. So, the youth of Yarmouth are really passionate and motivated to take action in this space. And so following that emergency declaration, the town created a climate action task force, YCAT, and I think some folks are here tonight too. So if you want to raise your hand, I'll give you a shout out, but thank you guys. So among those efforts and the declaration and the forming of the committees and the task force, those groups have been doing really great work in implementing projects. So CEAS is kind of the longer standing permanent committee that advises the town council on climate related issues and projects, provides policy insight, and like I said, supports project implementation along with town staff. YCAT is a temporary committee that was formed with CEAS members and members of the broader public. The committee or the task force will convene for 1 year to facilitate this climate action planning process with support from CEAS, myself, and town staff. And in the hopes that this climate action plan, like the bullets on the screen, will be guided by federal, state, and regional plans. We'll bring together a diverse group of local stakeholders to shape the plan. We'll position the town for grant funding, state and federal funding to fund some of these projects. And we'll educate, involve, and build capacity among the broader community. So Yarmouth has already made a commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So along with some really bold goals at the national level, by 2030, the town has committed to strive to have net zero emissions in town operations. So the facilities and the operations of the municipal town. At the same year, the town is also striving to reach an 80% reduction of emissions community-wide, so residents and businesses in the town, reducing from a baseline year. And then by 2050, we hope to have a net zero emissions community-wide. So these are the commitments that the town has made to strive for, and that CEAS and YCAT and others are dedicated to seeing happen. And that's all to say that we've really, Yarmouth has set itself up for success in this climate action planning process. And I'll pass it over to Sarah to dive into a little bit about what that process looks like and how are we going to, use this planning process to meet these targets.
Hello, everybody. I am Sarah Millsnap. I'm so short that I can't see you. I'm the Director of Sustainability at the Greater Portland Council of Governments, and I wanted to talk a little bit about our climate action planning process, which we are supporting a couple of municipal members in the region on right now. So Yarmouth is one of them. We're helping Freeport with a climate action plan as well, and Brunswick. And we have just wrapped up supporting Falmouth, the town of Falmouth. So our goal is really to help kind of leverage the work that's been done in the region, especially, with Portland and South Portland, who have one climate future, a joint climate action plan, and to leverage the work that's been done at the state to try and help smaller communities get climate action plans in place. So our goal is really to help support, smaller communities that municipal staff don't have as many resources as some of the bigger communities, to really sort of get organized, do some long-term planning so that you are in a better position to get funding, to start working on the projects and that you really value in the community. So we are working with the Yarmouth Climate Action Task Force, which is helping to kind of lead community engagement, to help give input to GPCOG. Like Kelly said, this is not our plan. This is really meant to be your plan, and you know your town the best. We are very excited that Medi is here. It makes our job so much easier to have a sustainability coordinator. So I really applaud both Yarmouth and Freeport in working together to hire a coordinator. And obviously working with existing town staff and the town manager to make sure that the town feels like the plan is implementable and actionable as well. So we're going to develop strategies that will reduce townwide emissions and build resilience and prepare for climate change. And really, we're hoping that the values that your community have, really, the plan can help support those community goals and protect economic development and reduce vulnerabilities across the board. So, all residents, municipal staff, elected officials, all the community-based organizations in town, they really have an important role to play in climate action planning. The workshop tonight is just one way in which we are eliciting input, where we have a survey as well. We're going to hopefully have many different ways to connect with community members, because we realize that not everyone, there's not just one way that works for everybody. A lot of people can't make town meetings. So we want to make sure that there's a broad range of ways to engage with the community to get feedback. Our climate action planning process is really built on sort of best practices. We have a period of time which we do data collection, obviously creating an advisory committee, which has already been done, and planning community engagement. Here, you can see. I'll go to that after to show you what's been done already. Community engagement really happens throughout, but we want to make sure we have a strong plan in place in the beginning. We've identified, data sources and conducted data collection to build the emissions inventory, which creates a baseline understanding of the sources of emissions in your town, and then a vulnerability assessment that really dives into what risk the town might be facing. And those two baseline reports will sort of help form the foundation from which we build the actions for the action plan section of the report that is more forward-looking and looks to lay out what the town hopes to do in the future to reduce emissions and build vulnerability. So we will have another public workshop as well, which we'll talk a little bit more about, but there'll be definitely periods for public comment, and the council will ultimately adopt the plan, and then municipal staff and the committees will start to look towards implementing. So we have made it through, the emissions inventory and sort of the early days of the vulnerability assessment data collection process. This workshop is really meant to be not just a vulnerability assessment workshop, because we also have some emissions data, but since you've already selected your emission reduction target, this workshop is a little more focused on vulnerability and making sure that we get as much input as possible on that front. So, and just to highlight, we sort of from this will be collecting input and moving into a climate action planning process, where we are, we'll hold another workshop this fall likely. We can talk with MICAT about timing, but the hope is to that workshop will be more forward facing and looking at getting input on the types of actions and strategies you'd like to see in the plan. So I'm going to dive a little bit into the emissions. If nobody has any questions, I think we can hold questions on the process till the end, and I'm happy to respond then. So this is a little bit of the emissions data that we've collected already. So these are total emissions. We put a little equivalent in here so you can wrap your mind around what that looks like. About 22,000 gas-powered cars for 1 year. That's the total emissions we've measured in Yarmouth. And we just did a comparison here of where you kind of lie in regional comparison. So you're actually fairly low compared with some other communities like Freeport, which is pretty high. But when we look at things like that, Freeport is obviously really an economic center where people travel to. So a lot of that is sort of contributes to their higher per per capita emissions. So in the inventory, we measured both municipal emissions and community-wide emissions, and here's just kind of a representation of where those sources are coming from. So in Yarmouth, in the community, about 42% of emissions are coming from transportation, which is actually significantly lower than the statewide, which is 54% of emissions come from transportation in statewide emissions inventory, and 50% is coming from houses, which is slightly higher than we see in other communities. And municipal emissions are largely driven by transportation on the municipal side, so the municipal fleet vehicles, and 27% from the municipal buildings, and then 7% from waste. So this is a good, town operations contribute 1.3% of the total community emissions, so a pretty small sliver. And just to revisit Yarmouth's commitment, which will be driving the climate actions that we select for the plan, is an 80% reduction in community emissions at 2030. This is a fairly aggressive commitment, and so as we're going through, now that we have the emissions inventory, the next step will be kind of modeling pathways and using the emissions data to understand how we could actually try and meet that 80% goal at 2030. So we'll have more information about that in the next workshop, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. So Kelly is going to hop up and just talk a little bit about the vulnerability that data that we're seeing so far in Yarmouth.
So in addition to greenhouse gas emissions and trying to reduce those, the other important thing to consider is how is the town going to adapt and be resilient to climate change in the future? What are they experiencing now? And what might they experience in the future, and how can we mitigate some of those impacts? So to kind of understand how to put everyone on the same page, when we talk about climate hazards, we're talking about the specific changes that is happening at the climate. So those increasing temperatures, increasing precipitation, sea level rise. But then we also have your vulnerabilities, and both of those combine to make up how you experience climate change, your impact of climate change. And so vulnerabilities are kind of your existing conditions, and different people, different systems, different ecosystems are going to respond to climate change differently based on kind of just how they are. We see, and so we're looking at both social or ecosystems and infrastructure. And sometimes I use the example that, we know that Scarborough has a lot of tidal marshes. They're pretty low lying. Anytime that there is, storms, future sea level rise, that is really concerned for flooding. Places like Yarmouth, Freeport, that have a little rockier coast, you're going to experience, the sea level is going to rise the same amount that it does in Scarborough, but your impacts are going to be different just because of how your town is set up, the geography of the town. It's going to be similar with social vulnerabilities. People who we see a range of different vulnerabilities. We often see that typically your age can impact how you're going to respond to climate change. Those who are often older or very young sometimes don't have the same immune system. They might have pre-existing conditions. So as air quality worsens, increasing temperature, they're a little more susceptible. So they might respond and have a greater impact on from climate change compared to someone else. Housing and affordability is another factor that we look at. And so if your house is damaged by a storm and you don't have the capability to spend extra money to repair it, that's going to cause problems. If you're already spending more money on your housing, on transportation, and you don't have that extra safety fund, you're going to have a bigger impact should something happen. And so we look at a range of social, demographic, socioeconomic, housing factors across Yarmouth to understand potentially how different people and different neighborhoods potentially across Yarmouth are going to respond to climate change. And part of that is also then to know where might we put resources and allocate projects or funding in the future to make the most impact and to help the most people. If you don't have a car and your road is flooded, if you don't have access to the internet and something happens, how are we going to communicate with you? How are we going to know that you're okay? And so we really want to understand, how are the people of Yarmouth responding to climate change? We're also looking at ecosystems and infrastructure. And I'll say we have more detailed posters, both on all of these topics, both here in person and also online. And I'll get to how we can interact with all of those in a minute. But kind of on the ecosystem side, Yarmouth has over 900 acres of conserved land, which is roughly about 11% of the total land area. And so the more kind of natural areas, open space, forested lands that you conserve, it's going to help your air quality. It's going to help your water quality. It can provide recreational areas to still help your social vulnerabilities. On kind of the seaside, we have tidal marshes. Tidal marshes really help buffer the land against storm surges and provide great habitat. And so as sea level rises, and kind of pushes those tidal marshes inland, you're going to see some migration. But unfortunately, if there is a lot of development, there's nowhere for those marshes to migrate into. So you're going to lose them, and you're going to lose that natural buffer and create more vulnerabilities and risks for your infrastructure. On the infrastructure side, we have partnered with Flood Factor, or First Street Foundation, and their flood factor model to look at inland flooding. And then we also have great sea level rise data from the state as well, to understand what roads, parcels, buildings might be impacted. And so kind of based on a draft analysis, and I will say that things that you see here right now, and even the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, are still draft. They're going through kind of quality check and understanding to make sure, and that's also where we will want your input to say this doesn't seem right. But we're seeing potentially over 100 buildings that could be impacted by flooding, and then over 50 roads that could experience flooding on a more regular basis, given the increased precipitation and storms. So now that we know kind of a little of what's going on in the town, we kind of want to know, okay, how are we going to accomplish this? And Sarah kind of laid out kind of the overall process for this. And so right now we really want to start getting your input and understand what you're seeing. And we're going to refine that, refine our data, take that all into the inventory, process it, and then start working towards specific strategies and actions we can use to kind of set these goals to be able to meet your emission reductions and to create a more resilient town. So actually, I think now might be a good time to stop and take questions before we dive into all of the workshop activities. Because after this, I will kind of describe all of the different posters and things that we have going on. I'll explain how, for those on Zoom, how you can interact. But I think at this point, it would be best if we open it up. And if anyone has any questions about the process, some of the information, we will break out. So if you have very specific questions, we will be floating around, and we are more than happy to talk with you about some of the specifics. But I think, Anna, if you have a question, raise your hand. And I have been told, do not touch any buttons on the microphone. I've been told it makes a really weird noise. The microphone is on. Just take it and start speaking into it. So you can come on. Are there any questions?
Scott. You're not allowed to ask questions, Scott. You should have the answers.
Thanks. Is this on?
Yeah.
Just a clarifying question. So the two benchmarks that we have for 2030, right? So it's 100% carbon reduction for municipal. That slide early on, that number is like 1.3% of our total carbon footprint as a community. Right?
The town operations.
So
yeah.
it seems like it's pretty doable to me, which I think is really exciting. The
Yeah.
bigger section, which I think is why everybody is here, is sort of that community-wide, and how do we work together to try to hit those metrics, which is going to be pretty difficult. I mean, it's going to be a pretty big lift and a lot of changes for a lot of people. So thanks for everybody for being here, but just want to clarify that 1.3%.
Yeah, correct. And just for comparison, Falmouth has a 2040 municipal operations target of net zero. So 2030 is ambitious, but I think it is doable, which is really exciting, especially given the amount of work Yarmouth has done already to reduce emissions. On that part, yeah.
Before we go, for anyone who is on Zoom, please type it into the Q&A, and we'll get, do we have any questions on Zoom yet? No. Okay, thank you.
It's a follow-up to that. I had a question about assessing that reduction. Is that based on the existing measurement and community now, or do you adjust in 2030 in relation to the increased population or increase, what is that? It's a reduction based on what's the baseline?
So maybe Megan or somebody would have a better sense of what the climate crisis declaration says, but normally what you do is pick a baseline year to reduce it from. So I think we just have the emissions data that we have for the emissions inventory we're doing right now is for 2019. So you could say an 80% reduction from 2019 data, or if there was an earlier emissions inventory. Okay, so based on 2008 as a reference point, and where's John? There. So we could do a comparison potentially of the 2019 emissions data that we have, referencing back to the 2008 emissions inventory, so we can see it's possible that it was measured slightly differently, but we can sort of, caveat that and see if there's been a reduction from 2008 already. And so looking at what the emissions were in 2008, it would be an 80% reduction from 2008 emissions at 2030. So when we do an emissions inventory, when we do the sort of pathways of looking sort of how to get there, we do factor in growth of population into that. So, we would have an understanding of what the baseline might be. If nothing were to be done between now and 2030, what would your emissions be, based on population growth? And then we sort of build a pathway to achieving 80% reduction by using that reference point.
I just have one other quick question. I'm sorry.
That's
With
okay.
transportation in coastal communities, does it include water, boats and everything in the emissions measurement?
Yeah, we do as good a job as possible collecting the emissions data from marine vessels. So we try and get data on, usually it's like gasoline gallons sold in a year, just to sort of try and capture the marine emissions as well. And GPCOG actually may be working on a marine electrification project soon, if anybody's interested. So.
This may be better. My name is Mary. I'm on YCAT, and so this might be better question for a workshop conversation. But I'm just wondering, it's bad luck that 2019 was right before a huge amount of people moved here, right?
Yeah.
And also, a lot of people started working remotely, and so there was an impact on transportation. So I'm just wondering how we can try to address the nuance in our data collection, because it's a very specific period of time here that we're looking at, and it seems to me that it takes a lot of going over the numbers fairly closely to make sure we're getting a real sense of what's here.
Yeah, it's tough. So the timing of choosing the 2019 is because obviously 2020 is not very representative of emissions, and actually 2021 to some extent as well, given the pandemic and the reduction in just sort of economic activity in general. So we picked 2019 because also 2022, there's not a full year of data that's available yet. So it's just like kind of tough timing. We are recommending, that most towns with climate action plans update their emissions inventory within 2 to 3 years. So I think when you go to revisit it, then you could certainly, you'll get an accurate snapshot. So you think about emissions inventories that they really are just sort of snapshots in time. And they're also not, I try and caution, that it's not really about down to the very last ton of measurement, because no matter what, the data is not always accurate. You can only measure the things that you can get data for, and that's not always, obviously, we model emissions, like, for example, for heating fuel in people's homes, because there's not a sort of centralized database of how much heating fuel people use. So, it's imperfect in general. So I don't like to get too caught up in the, what about the number of people that moved here? Like, overall, that's actually probably not a huge impact when you consider. But we could also include in the plan, if there's like again, the census numbers are not super accurate as well. And obviously the census was done at a challenging time to get accurate data. So, we try and caveat as much as possible that the data is only as accurate as we can collect. But we can, highlight some of those points in the plan just so people can understand what might be impacting the emissions numbers.
Hi. I have a question about the emissions for vehicles.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering how finely tuned that is. I know you counted the number of vehicles in Yarmouth. Did you have the data for how many miles were driven?
Yep.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And the type of cars or their fuel efficiency? I'm actually wondering specifically how we're going to get credit for hybrid cars
Yeah.
or fully electric cars in the future. Like, how precise is the data we're using, so that is it precise enough to be able to then see how the type of car is going to reduce our emissions?
Yeah. So we measure transportation emissions based on a model called Streetlight, which actually measures the miles that people move around a town, so within a certain boundary. So we measure, if somebody drove from point A to point B within the boundary, we'd measure all of those miles. If somebody travels outside and back in, we'd measure the amount of miles that are within the community. It is based on cell phone data, so it's data of capturing people literally moving around, in town. So it's accurate to the extent that people have their phones and get in their cars and drive places, and so that transportation emissions, again, is not 100% accurate. It doesn't necessarily capture every single mile that it was driven within the town, but it's more accurate than some other potential approaches. So in terms of electric vehicles, we're recommending within the plan that each of our towns sort of track additional indicators beyond just an emissions inventory, because doing an emissions inventory every year is not really it's challenging and it's burdensome for staff, and it's, you don't always capture sort of the changes that you might see. So we're recommending that each town sort of track additional indicators, one of which is how many electric vehicles are registered in the town, which you can get from the state, from state data. So that's a great place to say, right now, say there's almost 10,000 electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles in the state of Maine. So that number right now, we're not super concerned about its impact on the emissions that are transportation emissions happening right now, because it's such a small percentage. But as that number starts to grow and you see in your town, like if you get to 2030, 2040, and 30 or 40% of people are driving electric vehicles, that will be, I think, very important to start to measure. But right now, it's just such a small sliver that it's sort of not necessary to measure. Oh, it's okay. Well, it's for everybody online, so they can hear as well. I don't know.
Okay.
If they're
So I have a question going back to the 2050 net zero number.
Yeah.
I think I was just reading an article today from the UN that said we really need to, that they urgently are saying to people, you have to exponentially increase the quickness of how quickly we're reaching these benchmarks, and they're suggesting they have to be accelerated 5 times from what they are right now.
Wow.
And I'm just wondering, is Yarmouth already 3 times ahead of the average community, or where do we fall? And if we are not 5 times ahead, what more can we do to plan to get there?
Great question. I haven't done the math in terms of the amount of more faster that you're going than other communities. I will say an 80% reduction of community emissions at 2030 is the most ambitious target that I have seen in the state of Maine and in many states. So I think your community is much further ahead. I don't know how many times necessarily. I think Falmouth is looking around, I think, a 60% reduction at 2030. 65. So, communities are really starting to push the envelope, and both of those commitments and targets are much faster than the statewide target. So, I think it's starting to happen, and the message is getting down to communities. Community emissions are also somewhat easier to control than at the state level, so I can appreciate that the state is doing what they can, and they also, it's written into the legislation that they have to achieve their target. So I don't know how many times more aggressive, but you're certainly much, your target is much faster than many other communities. So it's exciting. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A piggyback question to that.
Yeah.
Why don't people talk? When I was a kid, everybody talked about energy efficiency. You turned off your lights, you reduced.
Mm-hmm.
It's now nobody even really talks about it. And I don't know if it's because they don't want to put the burden on the individual as well as the companies and things, but any insight into that? Because it's fast, it's immediate, it doesn't cost anything to turn, and in fact will save money.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious as to why that isn't a strategy that's being implemented on a larger scale.
Yeah, well, it'll definitely be a focus of the plan, so don't worry. There's definitely a lot of energy efficiency of actions that we can focus on, and one of the indicators that we recommend tracking is Efficiency Maine can give you reports on how many weatherization projects are done per year in your town, how many energy efficiency or heat pump upgrades are installed. So I think there's a strong focus. I think a little bit of it is, I think for a while it felt like a low-hanging fruit, and a lot of that low-hanging fruit has been picked to some extent. A lot of people have LED light bulbs. A lot of people have tried to conserve, and have much more efficient homes than we used to. So there's still a huge ways to go. But yeah, it will definitely be a focus of the plan. One of the great things that towns can do is look at adopting stretch codes or more efficient building codes so that new construction really is required to hit the highest efficiency possible. So there'll be a lot of focus on that. But yeah, I agree. More awareness around energy efficiency is really important.
So I'm Erin Zorko. I'm the planner. So this is a little bit of a softball question, but can you talk about how we plan to integrate this document into the comprehensive planning process?
Yes.
That is ongoing right now. We have an event on June 12th in this building, if I can get a little plug in.
Yeah.
But can you give us the group, and I can add to it if needed throughout the evening, but talk a little bit about how we're thinking about integrating the two documents.
Yeah, it's really exciting that we have timed this so perfectly, that the comprehensive planning process, the update is getting started, because what we really like to see at GPCOG is that a lot of these long-term planning documents really reference each other, are sort of like overlapping circles of effort. The Climate Action Plan is very detailed and focused on certain areas that the comprehensive plan probably won't get into in a very detailed way, but what we're hoping is that they will reinforce and reference each other and be very well aligned in terms of the targets that are set out in the Climate Action Plan, in terms of how to reach your emissions, but also the values that you're looking at driving your climate action plan and the areas that you'd like to focus on. So we're in tight communication with Erin and with the North Star planning team that is leading the comprehensive plan. So we make sure that we're all working from the same baseline data and information about sort of existing conditions in the town, and that as they start to look at, land use planning, strategies and looking at potential scenarios, that all of that really reinforces the work that we've done here on the Climate Action Plan, and make sure that there's not any glaring differences, or they're looking at land use scenarios that would blow up your emissions commitment or whatever it is. So we are making sure that we're very tightly coordinated. And Erin, happy to have you add anything. But the other piece is really hoping that the committees can reinforce community engagement on both the comprehensive plan and the Climate Action Plan. We don't want people to get fatigued, but we really want to make sure that everybody understands this is a great time to contribute to the future vision of the town.
I guess my question actually goes along with that a little bit. Some of these conversions, turning off lights is, good, a simple thing that you can do, but a lot of the home improvements are quite expensive.
Yeah.
Converting your whole house to heat pumps. And I'm just curious, since you said that you wrapped up Falmouth, if that was a big part of community incentives or education on how, if there are different ways for buy-in, no pun intended, for people who are deciding whether they want to, where they want to spend their money.
Yep.
And if the town of Falmouth really focused on that if they had incentives for residents to do those really big moves that would have a really big impact.
Yeah, so one of the actions that we are looking at in the Falmouth Action Plan is to create sort of a layered incentive program, and this is something that a lot of communities in the region are doing right now. Portland and South Portland both have like Electrify Everything or Electrify All campaigns where they're specifically targeting low and moderate income households to help sort of close that gap. Even with efficiency Maine rebates for some of these energy efficiency and heat pump upgrades, et cetera, there's still a really big initial investment that most low and even moderate or even some higher income homes can't really afford. And so the communities are really looking to try and cover that gap. So yeah, that's definitely something that Falmouth is interested in. I know of a couple, like 5 communities in southern Maine that work with Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission that are looking at teaming together to get federal resources potentially to help to then re-grant to community low and moderate income families and households. So there's lots of ways to do that, and Efficiency Maine's very supportive of it, and the state's very supportive of sort of layering those incentives on.
Yeah, I know. It wasn't necessarily in their plan, but one thing that came up at a couple meetings also with Falmouth is understanding that people don't always understand the process or how to even get the rebates or get funding or what's out there. And so they've also discussed, and this very high level I don't think it has really gone anywhere, but that there could be a community resource within Falmouth and something that we can also talk about for your town as to someone on staff or that they can go to really advertise, how do you do this? How do you walk through the process? What do you need to know? So there's both the cost and the incentive, but also the information of what's out there. How do I do it? And so understanding that there is also needing some of that help to guide people through, because a lot of times you look at it and you go, wow, that seems too complicated. I don't want to do it. And so if there's, a town staff or a liaison or someone to be able to help you walk through that is something that they've also discussed as well.
Sorry, cutting in front of other folks here. But I did want to mention, as another shameless plug here, there's some information at that front table similar to the work that Portland's doing in Freeport and Falmouth, sounds like, targeting low to moderate income folks for heat pump conversions. The Seas Committee worked with the town council recently to install a pilot program very similar to that. So it's a $2,000 grant that's sort of piggybacked on Efficiency Maine rebate programming for folks who are considered low to moderate income here in town, branded as sort of this Efficiency Yarmouth, again, is to leverage existing financing structures that help folks of all incomes further on, but really targeting that low to moderate income population for heat pumps this year. So more to come on that, but if you have any questions, Mehdi or Danielle or Dave Ertz or Megan or myself, happy to answer those for you. But just again, shameless plug. You'll hear about that more, but again, sort of hot off the presses. So, and now
Thanks,
I'll
Scott.
yield my
That's
time
exciting.
to Ed.
Yeah, hi. I'm sort of in the zoning world, and observed over the last 5 years or more nationally, there's a lot of discussion about the intersection of zoning and climate change, primarily emissions, and how we've zoned sort of in the past 40 or so years in a sprawling type pattern that is contributing majorly toward climate change. And locally, I've kind of passively watched the Seas and our local climate action people, but I've yet to see any mention of zoning. And now that's why I came tonight, because I want to put it out there. We are in the midst of a comprehensive planning process. So I sort of wondered, I was late to the show, so I don't know, maybe you discussed it earlier, but is there something in your offering that will help guide us? Because I listen and people talk about, well, Efficiency Maine, and we'll go to some heat pumps, but if you're building a 5,000 square foot house 5 miles out of town and you're doing heat pumps to feel good, what are you really doing? You're gas guzzling your kids to school multiple times a day and to appointments and band practice and, soccer. And in Yarmouth, we don't allow multifamily housing in the middle of town where people could walk. We don't allow it. So I think there's some fundamental things that we could be doing that could really have some big impacts, and it has to do with where we allow people to live.
Thank you. That is, yeah, very well taken. We will so because this is sort of meant to be sort of the baseline setting workshop where we're just looking at and collecting data on what we have right now, the climate action planning workshop in the fall will really focus a little bit more on the future actions that we're going to be recommending, and certainly land use and encouraging smart growth is core and central to those actions that we're going to identify. So that is really where I think the rubber is going to meet the road in terms of our coordination with the comp plan and the targets that are set in the climate action plan, sort of how we show that those need to be, achieved in some ways. So what we'll likely do is have in the pathways that we do for the emissions reduction work that we're looking at. So electrification of vehicles is certainly one approach to reducing emissions, but reducing vehicle miles traveled is really the other priority area that we're going to be focusing on. And, we'll present that at the next workshop and get some input from everybody in town about the ways in which you could see Yarmouth reducing their vehicle miles traveled. But really, there's basically two ways to reduce transportation emissions. One is to electrify, and the other is to reduce vehicle miles. So that is, you're absolutely correct. That is essential, I think, to achieving your very aggressive emissions reduction target, and I think that will need to be key. Yeah. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Okay.
I was just going to answer a little bit of what we've been thinking about so far on the task force, Sarah. So thanks for your question on zoning. We've, well, we're not writing the plan yet. We've crafted an outline thinking what should go in it and done a lot of looking at other towns, particularly in Maine, that have already created climate action plans. So we already have a placeholder for land use, that chapter, I think, which is about density, and multi-units are a lot more energy efficient than single units, so there's that question as well, and the transportation, and also, frankly, just land use. I think Kelly mentioned earlier with some of the data, the more forest there is in town or the more undeveloped land, the more oxygen is created and carbon is taken in. And so zoning can also have an impact on that as well. So stay engaged with us, and we'll be working closely with the comp plan people. We won't necessarily, I think, get too prescriptive in terms of zoning solutions, but we do envision the climate action plan make some recommendations on that in that area.
This isn't really worth your walk across the room, I'm sorry, but just to piggyback on Megan, I think, there's so many pieces that fall into this, and we're talking about emissions right now because it's important, but we really feel on the task force that it's about our sense of stewardship and the way we take care of the community we're in. So we're open to all opinions here. We really invite folks to come to our meetings. They're public. They're the first Wednesday of every month. Come tell us what your passion is and what's important and that you don't want us to miss out on, and we'll find a way to try to involve it, because this is the way we live in the space that we're in, not just whether or not we're driving here to there. So I really encourage people who have a lot of enthusiasm or particular expertise to come to a meeting and speak up, so we make sure we hear you and make sure we incorporate it. It doesn't work unless we're all involved. So it's very important that we, as big an umbrella as we can have here, we want to. So please keep talking about it.
Thank you. Well, great questions. I really appreciate everybody's thoughtfulness. We're going to dive into the work. Oh, anything online? No. Good. Okay. We're going to dive into the workshop, please. So I'll have Kelly introduce the stations. So you can.
Okay. Okay, I'll start with in person, and then I'll talk with, for those on Zoom or who are listening to the recording, how to participate. So we have a couple stations around. I'll start to my left, your right. Well, one, you'll see a lot of posters that have a lot of data, and we really want your feedback. So you'll also see a bunch of Post-it notes and pens. Please put as many stickies as you want on any of these boards. Provide us comments, what things are missing, what things are important to you, what seems correct or wrong. Any of your feedback is welcome. So please feel free to give it to us. We will also be around so you can talk with us. We have a poster on the social vulnerability. It has a few more of the kind of data and data points that we're looking at. We'll dive even deeper in the report. On the table to your right, there's a few open-ended questions that you'll see again floated around, but there's also a map of Yarmouth. So if there's anything in a specific location that you want us to know, circle it, put a sticker on, write it. There's little Post-it notes for you to tell us is there someplace that you always see flooding? Is there a lot of invasive species somewhere? Where do you think there really should be an EV charger? Anything goes. Is there a place that you really want to protect that you think is important, that has a lot of great value to you? Are there people that are in a certain location that you're really concerned about, and how do we reach them? Anything goes. Anything of a specific location that you want us to know, to think about, and to be, considered in the plan. Put it on the map. We want to see that as marked up as possible. In the back of the room on the table are a list of kind of different broad priority areas. Transportation, land use, water quality, public health, all of these are integrated. But as we start thinking about the actual action strategies, we want to also know where you think there are challenges and opportunities. What might be the most important? What might be difficult? Where might there be pushback? What should we consider? So we have some red dots and green dots and instructions on the table. Again, also Post-it notes if you have other suggestions, if you are thinking of things right now that you want to write, and strategies, go ahead and put that. We're open to it all. On the other side back of the room is our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. You'll see a little more of the detailed breakdown. The cars, the commercial vehicles, the marine, or residential housing, commercial housing, so all of that breakdown and a few more open-ended questions. And then on your left side is more of the vulnerability information, so both infrastructure and ecosystems, to really see potentially how your town could be impacted by climate change. And again, stickies, Post-its, come talk to us. We really want your feedback. Also, please, we have great representatives from Window Dressers and Gulf of Maine Research Institute. They have a lot of really great programs going on, and if you're interested in weatherization, please go talk to them as well. Maddie, I'll do the online. Okay. For those who are online listening to the recording, pass along to your friends who I know are all jealous they're not here right now. Tell them all to go to yarmouthclimateaction.org. There is a community workshop page, and it has all of the same posters and information. It also will have the presentation up, so you can click on that. And then we have an interactive Miro board. So that's where you can go in and you can, again, add stickies, you can add the dots, you can interact the same way you can in person online. And below that, there's also a similar survey to the map of saying, put a location, tell us what's going on. So we want to make sure that if you are online, if you pass along the website to all of your neighbors, your friends, relatives in the future, that they can interact and give feedback as well in the same way that you're doing here. And yes, it will be open for a while. We are not closing that down. Take some time, think about it. Even when you go home tonight and all of a sudden you wake up tomorrow and you said, I should have talked to someone or put that note, go on the website. It's all going to end up there. And so you can see everything, add it in, and we'll kind of track it all down.
So I just wanted to give a quick little plug for the prize raffle that I'm running. On the front, you'll see this beautiful kitchen countertop compost bucket. It has a brand new branded Yarmouth long sleeve and one blue bag. So that's the prize for tonight for those folks who are here. So I'll put these, big blue bag. So I will be putting these little activity passports out on each station. And if you visit a station and you're contributing or you're reading the post or whatever, the station leader will make a little mark and then you'll pop it into the box here, and you could win our beautiful prize. So that's all I had to add. And I'll just kind of leave this up. This is a little plug of how you can get in touch with us and kind of the calls to action. So visit the website like we talked about. Come to the events that YCAT and others are hosting that are super fun. And then make sure that you stay tuned for the action workshop this fall, where we're going to dive into strategies that we've heard tonight in other places. Great. Yeah.
If people are still around, we'll reconvene around 7:30 if you need to leave. No worries at all.
All right. So now you can choose a station to start at and make your way around the room. Thanks so much. All right. Hi, everyone. We're just going to come back together to close up the interactive portion just for a moment. All right. I'm glad to see so many active conversations and sticky notes. Thank you all. So you can find your seats or stay standing. I'm just going to do a couple of reminders. So thank you so much again for all of your input tonight, and I hope that folks watching the recording and interacting with the activities online, just thank you so much. We're going to take all this feedback and we're going to digest it and find trends, and really we're going to read every sticky note. Like, this is really amazing feedback to get. So thank you all for coming. Please keep being involved with this process. Check our website for updates. Email us at yarmouthclimateaction@gmail.com, and I will get back to you. Stop in and see our Wednesday meetings if you have something to say and share with us. Come to our events. We will be advertising the fall workshop in the summer. We haven't picked a date yet, and please do go to the comprehensive planning event on June 12th right here in the Log Cabin. So thank you all very much. Please help yourself to snacks, take it home, have your last conversations, and add your last sticky notes. And again, this will all be available online to continue adding to.
And how long is the online going to be collecting info before we start to gather?
One.
We can leave it open.
Yeah.
I'll use the mic just for we can leave it open for a while. As we collect the sticky notes, we're actually going to be putting all of that on to the online, so everything is in one place. So, and kind of digest it from there, and so we can take it from the online portion. So it will be up for a while, at least a month, and we will be gathering information and still progressing as we get comments that way as well.
Any last questions for GPCOG or myself before we wrap up? All right. Okay, thank you all so much. Have a nice night.